Russia has laid siege on Ukraine, displacing hundreds of thousands of citizens. Why is Russia obsessed with Ukraine? What is the West doing about it? And could this end up being a Cold War sequel? You're watching Politics Corner. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, welcome to Politics Corner. Hey Ishaan.
Hi, Pallavi.
I'm sure none of us have escaped the news, and you've probably seen what's going on across the world.
Despite my best efforts, I've also not been able to completely escape the news.
Yeah, I think the only true silver lining in all of this has been the incredible resilience and courage that has been shown by the people of Ukraine. Right. I think that's the only thing that has given us any heart and any hope, and led us to, the episode that we're doing right now.
Exactly. And I'm sure that's understanding what's going on in Ukraine, understanding what's going on in Russia, what you can do about it, how it's probably going to turn out. These are all questions that our viewers right here probably have, and we're here to answer them. So let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think a lot of folks are going to be, they've been trying to answer this question, why Ukraine, why now, what's going on with Vladimir Putin? So what do you think, Ishaan?
So I think to answer the question of why Russia is fixated on Ukraine, we need to actually think in the context of geopolitics. We need to actually think like Vladimir Putin, which sounds like an insane prompt from the beginning, but entertain it for a moment. Think about...
Here's my point, though. We've heard this a lot, right? We've heard Twitter, we've heard other celebrities saying he's psychotic, he didn't get love when he was little. Do you agree with that?
I actually don't. And I know that this will be controversial, but I believe that what he's doing is a very amoral, very evil thing. But at the same time, I fully acknowledge that what he's doing from his perspective makes total sense in terms of achieving his interests. So
let's break that down, right? Let's break down, why is he doing what he's doing right now?
Exactly. So first of all, Vladimir Putin knows that Russia's borders are insecure. Okay, any country's borders are insecure, and you need to always be thinking about, if you're the leader of that country, how you're going to defend those borders. So east of Kazakhstan, it's a little bit easier to defend. You're past the North European plains. Mongolia and China are both also allies, and it's definitely easier to defend by the western flank, which is defined by the North European plain. It's basically this large, flat land that you can just funnel massive numbers of troops into. And that's exactly what happened in both the Napoleonic Wars and in World War II, when we pushed all the way into Stalingrad and then into Leningrad and then into, well, now it's modern day St. Petersburg. And from Russia's perspective, that just absolutely cannot happen. So they need to push their boundaries as far west as possible to defend that border.
So one thing, what you're saying is, all of this started when Ukraine decided, or at least requested, to join the NATO.
I think partially yes, but as we'll get to in a moment, there are actually a couple more reasons that in the process of researching this I found, which I don't think that the media is talking about, and that's very concerning to me, that we're not actually covering the full scale of the geopolitics at play here.
But from a military perspective, would you agree that it's because Ukraine wanted to join NATO?
Yes and no. I think NATO is more of the straw that broke the camel's back. It's really more of any threat that Ukraine becomes allied with the West, whether that's through NATO or through the European Union or just through general individual alliances. In any context, that would be concerning to Russia. And I think that them entertaining the idea of joining NATO just pushed the Russian leadership over the edge.
Yeah. So up until a few weeks ago, everybody was predicting that, hey, Putin is showing aggression, but he is not going to invade Ukraine. This is what he's doing because he wants his sanctions removed, or he's, looking to show his a show of power, but he's not going to all out invade Ukraine. In fact, you were one of the only people who actually said we're staring at a very high likelihood of a full-on combat war. And I disagreed with you at that time, but of course, now we know better. So what do you think changed?
Well, actually, I'd like to correct you a little bit there. I was saying that there's a good chance it might happen, but even I had my reservations. And for good reason. It's incredibly, at the time, people were doubtful that Putin would really want to do anything because for the last, 20, 25 years, he's had this sort of unspoken deal with the West where he gets to encroach on Ukrainian or also Georgian territory, basically just one spoonful at a time. And then after that, the United States and NATO, they make a big song and dance about it. They issue sanctions, they condemn their actions, and then eventually they just reach this diplomatic resolution when the wind blows over. And Putin gets to keep what he takes, but he waits until the next presidential administration to take anything else so that no individual president has to look like they're acquiescing to Russia. And also Russia doesn't have to go to war with anybody because even if you think that Putin is just this huge aggressor, even he knows that war is unpleasant, it's a cost, it's burdensome. So while he might not be a pacifist, if he can, he certainly wants to avoid it.
That makes sense. And I think what you said is interesting, right? He gets to keep what he takes. Like that's what he's been doing. That's what he did with Crimea. That's what he did with, when his earlier invasion of Georgia happened.
Right. Yeah, during the Bush administration when he invaded Georgia, or during the Obama administration when he annexed Crimea. And then now, the Biden administration, just a couple weeks ago, it seemed like he was just falling into that pattern by recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk as Russian separatist regions in Ukraine without a morsel of evidence. But it seemed like, okay, he's going to stop there. That's going to be it. But now this begs the question, he didn't stop there. He actually kept going. And that's concerning for a couple reasons. One, it means that we're in completely uncharted territory. We don't really have a precedent for what's going to happen here. And two, we really don't know what he's after.
So that's a really good point, right? I want to ask you something. Another thing we've heard a lot, over the last couple of days is he has this vision of a big united Mother Russia. Do you think it's patriotism at the heart of this, or is it something a little bit more basic, like just money?
I think that Vladimir Putin could not care less about this giant Soviet empire. In fact, I found interviews of him in 2012 saying, anyone who does not miss the Soviet Union has no heart. Anyone who wants it back has no brain.
So he might reminisce about the good old days, but that's not really what he's looking for here.
No, in fact, there's another reason besides the geopolitical advantage, which we explained earlier, that Putin is after Ukraine. And that is, in 2012, we received the first reports that Ukraine's exclusive economic zone contains an estimated 2 trillion cubic meters of natural gas.
And why is natural gas important to Russia?
Because it's the largest sector of the Russian economy. Russia is literally a petrostate, which supplies over 35% of Western Europe's energy demand. Now, I want you to imagine that Ukraine begins also supplying Western Europe with natural gas and oil. Guess what happens? It's a race to the bottom for prices.
Right.
So to Russia, aside from just having a bunch of natural gas to sell for profit, it's also about making sure that someone else does not sell in competition with them. And on the same breath as drilling natural gas, during the Soviet era, Russia built several pipelines from Russia to Western Europe through Ukraine, because big deal. It was all sort of just one big country. But then when they split into 15 different republics, Ukraine began demanding billions of dollars in tariffs every single year just to ship that Russian natural gas over to Western Europe. And that's a problem for Putin, because this is the biggest sector of his economy. This is literally the pillar on which the Russian empire stands. And he needs to make sure that, one, there's no competition. Two, he expands it as much as he can. And three, he cuts all costs possible with measures like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which will circumvent Ukraine.
So coming back to this, right, after looking at all these reasons you've outlined, the military advantage, the economic advantage, the issues that he needs to deal with just, making sure Crimea is functional, it's not about his feelings. He's not a psycho. He doesn't have a dream of big Mother Russia. It's simply about the money. It's simply about the economics of it. And, I'm really shocked at some of the celebrities in the West that are actually putting out tweets about, how his feelings weren't, nurtured as a child, or he wasn't loved. Do you remember that clip that you were showing me?
Anna Lynn McCord,
right,
a Canadian actress, she put out this poem for Putin where she pretends to be his mother. Why don't you check this out? I can't even do it justice.
Vladimir Putin, I'm so sorry that I was not your mother. If I was your mother, you would have been so loved, held in the arms of joyous light. Never would the stories plight the world unfurled before our eyes, a pure demise of nations sitting peaceful under a night sky. If I was your mother, the world would have been warm. So much laughter and joy, and nothing would harm. I can't imagine the stain, the soul-stealing pain that the little boy you must have seen and believed, and the formulation of thought quickly taught that you lived in a cruel, unjust world.
That clip goes on. Okay, the United Nations has been largely ineffective in helping soften this conflict, although they were very quick to resolve that this was a form of torture. I don't know what spurs this idea that just because he's doing something evil, that it's psychotic.
Oh, he wasn't loved.
Yeah, exactly. They're portraying him like this internally depressed child who's been scarred, like his parents had a divorce or something. This is nonsense.
So now that we know his motivation, why don't we talk about what exactly has he done so far?
So unlike what the Russian embassy said that they would do, the attacks that began last Thursday were not limited to eastern Ukraine. They were not limited to military targets. They were all over. They were in western Ukraine. They were in notably Kyiv, the capital city. They were in schools, neighborhoods, bridges. Starting last Thursday night, residents began sleeping in subway stations, which had been converted into bomb shelters because if you lived in a high-rise, it was simply unsafe to stay up there.
Ukraine has begun an all-out draft of men, 18 to 60. They're, letting their families leave the country, but they're staying back to fight. And President Zelensky has said that anybody who's willing to fight to defend the country will be armed.
Right, and I'm glad that you brought up President Zelensky because both him and the United Nations have put out statements pleading for peace, which has largely met no avail, although Putin did agree to send delegates to Belarus for arbitration and negotiation with Ukraine, which began yesterday, Monday the 28th.
I'm not putting out a lot of hope on that, though. Are you?
No, I'm not either, because here's the thing. Zelensky yesterday offered or requested to be admitted to the EU as soon as possible, and he's likely going to see that happen. And that basically puts a complete shot in the leg to any hope that Russia might settle for Ukraine being a non-aligned state, because it's clear that even if they're non-aligned on paper, that they're very much now aligned with the West.
And anyway, for the reasons that we talked about earlier, I think it's more than just being a member of NATO.
Right, and as we've also talked about, Putin is clearly after the exclusive economic zone. He's clearly after that money, and he clearly wants to make sure that not only is Russia secure, but Russia is secure in their market for natural gas.
Talking about the attack specifically, Russia is pursuing a Marines first attack strategy. This is where they send in a few agile troops to actually, establish some bases around the city and around the important bases in Ukraine. And then they're going to follow in with more bulky troops in order to completely take over the nation. So that's been his current military strategy at the moment.
Right, and he's probably going to attack critical infrastructure to try to devastate and weaken Ukrainian troops, and then try to use the places which he establishes far away from Ukrainian troops to siphon in big and bulky troops to then fully sprawl out and occupy the nation. But to Ukraine's credit, they have put up a much better fight than Putin, or frankly, the world anticipated, okay? Putin was talking about how there would be rebel forces that would rise up and welcome him as a liberator. Yeah, that didn't really happen. I don't know. If it did, I still have yet to hear about it. Ukraine even managed to repel ground troops on the eastern border. Russia, despite their massive financial and technological advantage, have still not managed to take out the Ukrainian Air Force. Okay? This has gotten so bad for Russia that they've had to unleash another 1/3 of their military might to fight this war. And Belarus is considering sending troops of their own in to help assist Russia. So this is actually getting pretty bad for Putin. He was expecting this to be a pretty easy takeover, and frankly, the world was expecting this to be a pretty easy takeover. Within a week, it'd be done and dusted. And yet, Ukraine has actually banded together really strong to defend their homeland, and we can only commend them for that.
I completely agree with you. I mean, the Ukrainians have actually risen to the challenge, and they've actually shown the world that we're not done yet. They were not pushovers when it came to this takeover. They fought back. In fact, President Zelensky, declined the offer from U.S. to evacuate him. He actually told his people that this may be the last day that they will see him alive, but he's going to, stand his ground and fight. And it's just extremely admirable to see the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky in this situation. Now, this is all Ukraine. So let's talk about how Ukraine's allies in the West have actually responded to this. What do you think, Ishaan? Do you think we've done a good job?
That's a controversial question to answer. I don't think so. I think that we've definitely done some. So, for example, we have sent in, as the United States, we have sent in anti-tank missiles and forces to help train the Ukrainian forces. Western Europe has sent in aircrafts, anti-tank missiles, and also training forces. But really, we haven't sent in any direct troops to help support them in the effort, largely because we're afraid of what Vladimir Putin might do if he sees superpowers getting involved in this. But for example, Western Europe is actually supplying more aid than the United States is at this point. Germany alone spent $400 million in military aid last week.
And by the way, one of the reasons the West has not done more is because doesn't Putin pretty much have NATO in a headlock? What do you think?
Yes, and I like the way that you phrased that. Putin really does have NATO in a headlock because of natural gas dependence. Like we said, this is the largest sector of the Russian economy, but at the same time, it's what Western Europe and the United States rely on Putin for. Which brings me to Joe Biden, who is supposed to be the leader of the free world, but in reality is the leader of nap time. Okay? Joe Biden has been talking about how he has sanctioned Russia in such a big way, and it's gonna devastate them. It had absolutely no impact on the Russian economy. You know why? Because he didn't sanction the largest sector of the Russian economy, natural gas. Why didn't he sanction the largest sector of the Russian economy? Because he's dependent on Russia for natural gas. Why are we dependent on Russia for natural gas? Because rather than actually become energy independent, he would like to pretend that we are some big green country and that we don't actually drill for oil here. Yeah, we don't. We just import it from unfriendly nations. We are just as energy reliant on fossil fuels as we were during the Trump administration. The only difference is we are getting it not from our own backyard, but from countries that could try to cut us off in a time of war.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. What everybody's afraid of and everybody's thinking about is if Putin is psychotic, are we looking at a full-on nuclear war? What do you think?
So I think that there is both supporting and dissuading facts to that theory. On one hand, like we just talked about, Putin is not psychotic. He is rather rational in terms of the geopolitics here. But Putin did also kind of indirectly threaten the West, saying that if we were to get involved, we would experience consequences like we've never experienced before, which sort of indirectly references nuclear warfare. But then he actually backed up his threats. Check this out.
Meanwhile, Putin is ordering his military command to put its nuclear deterrent on high alert in response to what he called aggressive statements from NATO member countries. The White House calling that a baseless accusation.
So this actually looks like he's serious. He is threatening nuclear warfare.
And I think that's exactly the point. It's more or less an empty threat. Okay, if you look at this from his perspective, he knows that nuclear warfare is a suicide move in the context of the Russian Empire. He's unlikely to really use nuclear warfare unless it's like plan F. Okay, he's still got A, B, C, D, E before that. The reason that he's bringing it out is because he wants to demonstrate a willingness that the West does not have to put everything on the line for this conflict and to scare off the West from intervening.
So if the purpose was to scare away the West, do you think he achieved his goal?
Yes. Okay, he has prevented the West from sending in any direct troops to support the Ukrainian forces. And the Biden administration actually sort of acquiesced to him in this sense, where they basically just did the obligatory condemnation of his aggression.
This is really a pattern that we've seen from President Putin through the course of this conflict, which is manufacturing threats that don't exist in order to justify further aggression.
Ah, yes. Thank you, Jen Psaki. Captain Obvious. You are so needed. Your unique analysis is so appreciated. Oh, wait, no. This was obvious to everybody.
So I guess to an extent, Putin did get what he wanted with this display of aggression. I mean, the West is reluctant to send in their troops. But there is another way, right? Like, the West can compete in a different way. They can actually impact the economy of Russia.
Right. So this is something that I have been talking about. And it is an option. We could try to compete our way out of this conflict. And the other huge benefit there is I really don't think that is something Putin is anticipating. He is looking at NATO and the United States right now, and he sees how divided we are, and he sees that we have a lot of internal politics going on. And he really, I think, was banking on the fact that America and NATO were sort of just going to let this go. Yeah,
that's a great point, actually. I think we should emphasize that. I think one of his miscalculations has been on how the European Union has responded.
Right. So, like we said, President Zelensky actually asked to join the European Union, which basically torpedoed any chance of a successful negotiation with Russia. And then the European Union resolved to cut off Russia from SWIFT, the international banking system. So if Western Europe resolves to cut off Russia from their natural gas supply, and if the United States can do the same, if the United States can, for example, reopen the Keystone XL project, invest in our own energy independence, we can basically bleed Russia from the inside out. Because guess what? It's like saying that someone is becoming too powerful, but you're also their biggest customer. You actually have the power to make them not powerful.
Yeah. Most of the money that he makes out of his natural gas exports, he's using that to fund his military activities.
Right. And at the same time, even though we're not fighting any direct conflict right now, we really need to invest in our military. So does Western Europe. And the reason for that is because we need to be capable of fighting either direct or proxy wars, not because we want to, no one wants to, but because we have to match their aggression and power in order to deter any conflicts.
Very true. As a matter of fact, I think this has prompted a lot of the European nations to declare that they will invest in their military. And it's time for United States to do the same.
Right. I never thought I would say this, but we need to take our military as seriously as Western Europe is. Okay. Germany has resolved to spend over the next year alone $100 billion in defense. Okay. They are planning to exceed the 2% GDP defense spending target of NATO, which is unprecedented from any nation besides the United States.
Guys, this is what's going on now, right? If you look at the world situation and you look at how and where these superpowers are forming, they're mostly dictatorships, whether it's Russia or China, and their interests are not aligned with the interest of Western Europe and North America. And so we need to go back and really examine how much we want to spend on our defense and how strong do we want to be if we do not want to be threatened by these powers. Because, it's not the right time. Like, there is a saying in India where when you're thirsty, it's not the time to dig a well. You need to be prepared for these types of situations in the future.
Precisely. And here's the thing. Western Europe is actually taking this conflict seriously, whereas the United States seems to think it's some kind of joke. Okay, Germany actually halted the Nord Stream 2 project and it decided that they're actually going to begin drilling in their own backyard. Okay, this is an incredibly smart move. They're going to begin investing in their own natural gas reserves. So guess what? Germany, they don't care about the green idiots of the world. They don't care about the voters who seem to think that climate change is actually going to wipe us off the face of the earth tomorrow. Is it an important issue? Undoubtedly. Is it more important than deterring a nuclear superpower? Absolutely not.
Yeah. It's a question of priorities. And like I said, we are no longer in that situation where we have the luxury to take a back seat on this.
Now, I want to end on a almost celebratory note here, because when we cut Russia off from SWIFT, it resulted in a 30% overall dive in the Russian stock market. Okay? The Russian ruble, their currency, has crashed to a record low value in comparison to the American dollar. Okay, 109 ruble now only equal $1. This is unprecedented. The Russian central bank hiked their interest rates to help fund their war, and the EU is largely spearheading this effort. See, this is the problem. The United States used to be the leaders of the free world. We used to be the people that everyone looked to on how to mitigate a crisis. And right now, Western Europe, these countries that used to be basically militarily insignificant for the last 20, 30 years, have turned around and said, okay, look, Joe, we need you to let the big kids talk right now.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way, right? I mean, if the Western European powers are also investing in defense, that's awesome. But so should United States. I think that we need to take an example and say, hey, if these guys who were comfortable in not having any military for so many years are now starting to think that maybe military is needed, then we should be rethinking our strategy as well.
Right, and I don't think it's just about the defense spending. It's also about making sure that we are independent. We are not relying on adversarial nations for critical goods. We've talked about this in a previous episode. This is the national security defense argument. And we need to consider it significantly more. But I really want to admire how Russia expected to waltz in and just take Ukraine like it was nobody's business. And yet the West has resolved to cut them off from SWIFT, cut off their economy at the knees. Ukraine has resolved to seriously put up a fight and prevent them from actually even establishing friendly bases as of yet, which was just completely unexpected. And Vladimir Putin was most certainly not expecting the Russian ruble to dive in its value so terribly that he is now struggling to finance this war, and he's investing a significant portion of his military and his allied militaries. So we're really giving them a run for their money, and the days of the Russian Empire being a superpower might be waning. So, folks, here's the problem. Joe Biden still is not willing to reopen the Keystone XL project and make America energy independent. Now, I want to clarify, we are using the same amount of fossil fuels today as we were yesterday, and we will use the same amount tomorrow. We simply do not have the infrastructure to be green yet. And that is a goal that we should work towards. But it's all about the optics. If we're getting natural gas from Russia, forget about the fact that it's super dangerous and that they can cut us off at any point, and that means that we're basically in a headlock in terms of dealing with them on the international stage. Forget about that. At least we can pretend that we're green. We're not. We're using the same amount of fossil fuels. And this is all about pleasing the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of Congress, okay?
They're so loud, though.
They're so loud, and they are so hard to not listen to because they are so grating, okay? They are the Whoopi Goldbergs of legislatures. But the point is, Joe Biden is not doing this in our national interest. He's doing this in the optical interest. He is doing this for a public relations standpoint. He knows that later today, literally hours after this video will release, he will begin his first night of the State of the Union address. And I want you to prepare for a plethora of media lies and spins about everything he has done over the past year to make him seem remotely competent and try to convince a small, incredibly naive portion of the electorate that voting Democrat is a even marginally intelligent move come November.
Do you want to talk about who's going to break that down, Ishaan?
I do, Pallavi. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. So if you didn't watch the trailer yesterday, we have launched Pegasus Brave, and Politics Corner is one of the many shows that we will be hosting under that name, one of which will be my show airing first this Friday called The Take, where we are going to discuss the State of the Union. We are going to discuss all of the reasons why Joe Biden just wants to make you think that Democrats work when in reality, they suck. And we know this. So if you want to see me break down all of Joe Biden's State of the Union lies and all of the things that he is trying to convince you make him a good leader and or his party a competent party, both of which are completely untrue, you should watch The Take airing this Friday right here on this channel, Pegasus Brave, same time, 5 p.m. Pacific. I will see you there. Thank you so much.